Members, the next bill on our agenda is House File 3910, Representative Richardson. I will move, for right now, I'll move the bill to have it in front of us. My understanding that there's been a late amendment that's come forward that needs to be dealt with. And so we're going to hear the bill, then we're going to lay it over. And when we get the amendment sorted out, we will then bring it back up and get it voted out. Representative Richardson, you want to present your bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House File 3910 would establish Juneteenth, which is celebrated June 19th, as a state holiday. Some are under the mistaken impression that the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 ended the brutal institution of slavery. However, as the Civil War ended, there were still thousands of Black people that remained enslaved. It is a reality how freedom in this country has always been delayed for Black people. In Minnesota and across the US, July 4th is celebrated, and it's about freedom and liberty, but it's an imperfect freedom because slavery still legally existed in this nation. To be clear, Black men contributed to the independence of our nation and fought in the Revolutionary War in a time when the vast majority of Black Americans were enslaved. Abolitionist Frederick Douglass eloquently pointed out the paradox of this imperfect freedom in his July 5th, 1852 speech. What to the slave is the 4th of July? The celebration of Juneteenth provides the space for all of us to reflect on a more inclusive freedom. The end of chattel slavery in this country is a milestone worthy of recognition, reflection, celebration, and a step towards the commitment to a progress to truly living up to the promise that all are created equal. It's a chance to acknowledge how far we've come and how far we have to go. Before I turn this over to my testifiers, I would just like to take a moment to recognize the late Representative Richard Jefferson, who passed away last year, that began this conversation back in 1996 and brought more recognition to Juneteenth with his work at the legislature, which was unanimously supported on the House floor by his colleagues to recognize Juneteenth. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would like to yield my time to my testifiers.
And before we go to the testifiers, Ms. Roberts, there's a fiscal note on this bill. If you want to explain the fiscal note.
Mr. Chair, members, again, Helen Roberts from the House Fiscal staff. Yes, we have a fiscal note from Minnesota Management and Budget that states that two things. One, that any administrative effort required to administer this was minimal and there are no costs attributed to that. And then there's discussion about how this impacts state agencies and that Juneteenth is already established as a holiday in the collective bargaining agreements that have been passed so far by the Subcommittee on Employee Relations and have gone into effect. The only piece that is not addressed is the assumption for state agencies that are not yet, those collective bargaining agreements have not yet been agreed to, or for example, the legislative branch or the judicial branch that aren't addressed by MMB. But the MMB portion clearly states that they're not anticipating any cost.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. I'll go to the testifiers. The first testifier we have is Lee Jordan, State and Regional Director for National Juneteenth. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. You're muted, Mr. Jordan. I'm not hearing Mr. Jordan. With that, why don't we go to Ms. Weeks or Miss Moore, Meredith Moore. Again, identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Hello, my name is Meredith Lee Moore, and today I come to you as a tax-paying homeowner in Mendota Heights, a business owner, a parent, and a descendant of Africans brought to this country and enslaved. Thank you, State Government Finance and Elections Committee, for allowing me to speak in favor of House File 3910 to make June 19th a state holiday. And thank you to Representative Richardson for this opportunity. I was born on July 5th, and I always enjoyed watching the fireworks on July 4th, but I grew up celebrating my freedom on Juneteenth. Growing up in Minnesota, I often found myself teaching my peers, my neighbors, and now my colleagues about my history and felt confused about why they didn't know about this important part of our nation's journey. I would explain to them how enslaved people in Texas were not told about the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 because it was illegal to read or write, and that about 250,000 Black people continued to suffer under chattel slavery until the Union Army arrived in Galveston on June 19th in 1865. I would tell them about how Juneteenth marked the beginning of Reconstruction and opened the doors for our families to reunite and begin the journey to equality that we're still walking today. I remember Juneteenth fondly, and I celebrate it now with my boys. And House File 3910 is part of recognizing our country's progress and teaching our diverse community where our struggles stem from. Former State Representative of Texas, Al Edwards, said it best: every year we must remind successive generations that this event triggered a series of events that one by one defines the challenges and the responsibilities of successive generations. That's why we need this holiday. Let us preserve the legacy of our ancestors and recognize their unpaid labor to build this country. Let us honor their fortitude and strength by recognizing June 19th as a state holiday that marks the end of chattel slavery and the beginning of a new chapter that we're still writing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Great testimony. Is Mr. Jordan, I see he dropped off my screen. Mr. Jordan, are you with us now? I see you now on my screen. Can you unmute yourself and then again identify yourself and proceed with your testimony?
Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Lee Jordan. I'm the Midwest and State Director for the National Juneteenth. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm just here to first of all, to thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you about Juneteenth. I have been involved in the Juneteenth celebration for over 30 years. And like many people in our community, that history has not really been fully explained, celebrated, or commemorated. So it is important, as much as possible to let everyone know how important Juneteenth is, not only just to the African-American community, but to all, because none are free until we all are free. And the important part about Juneteenth is the fact that, yes, it took a while for the information to get to Galveston, Texas, but just remember, Galveston, Texas was not the only state in which held, their slaves a little bit longer than they should. Yeah. So Juneteenth gives us that opportunity to not only to talk about the history of slavery, but to talk about the contributions of African-American people here in America. Because the important part of the title is that we are the United States. So if we are the United States, the main thing to do is to include everyone in a celebration that commemorates freedom so that all might be able to tell their freedom story in a way that is important, not only to our youth, but for those that have gone on that don't have a voice that we can speak for them. The contributions that are important, not only to the African-American community, but to the world at large. Because Juneteenth is not just some single day of celebration. It is a continuous, information being shared, being brought out. So Juneteenth is, as far as I'm concerned, such an important part of American history and not just African-American history. So, and Minnesota has celebrated Juneteenth for many, many years, but mostly it got into the newspapers around 1986. So from 1986 to this present day, we have been celebrating Juneteenth over on the north side of Minneapolis mainly, but there's also smaller celebrations as well. So it's important not only to talk about that history, but to give everyone an opportunity to understand the importance of Juneteenth as a celebration and a commemoration of history. And yes, Frederick Douglass did speak to President Abraham Lincoln about the importance of letting African-American slaves, become a part of the fight for freedom, because he said, if you give the U.S. colored troops their opportunity to prove that they are valuable and important to the cause itself, they would actually be able to win the war. In fact, they did. So it's so important to just understand we are talking about the importance of history here in America and not just African American history.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you.
Any questions? 52 hanging around. Any questions for the author or for the testifiers?
Mr. Chair, I had one more testifier, Mr. Reynoso.
Oh, well, he's not on my list. Sorry about that. He's not on my list. But Mr. Reynoso, if you want to identify yourself for the tape and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Edward Reynoso, I'm the Legislative and Political Director for Teamsters Local 320. I want to take this opportunity to, first of all, thank Representative Richardson for bringing this forward. It's long overdue. And I really want to thank also Mr. Jordan and Mrs. Moore from bringing the historical perspective. I think it's really important. This is, we believe, a very important bill on several issues. So I also want to bring forward the issue that we have while it's recognized as a state holiday for state employees, and as was mentioned earlier by Mrs. Roberts, it's already recognized and employees at the state level are already receiving that as a holiday. What we have an issue with right now is through the collective bargaining process, employers in the public sector, which we represent thousands of members, are sometimes refusing to recognize Juneteenth as an official holiday until it's on the list of official state holidays. Passing this law, one, is way long overdue, and two, clarifies policy for local municipalities and government agencies and further encourages the private sector, but does not require to also treat it as such. So with that, Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to testify on this bill, and we Teamsters are in solid support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reynoso. And I'm sorry your name wasn't on my list, but that's fine. Again, questions. I see no hands popping up. Representative Richardson, if you want to do your wrap up and we can get to it, we can lay this over and look forward to your amendment when it comes.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. I just wanted to take the moment to be able to thank both Mr. Jordan and Ms. Moore for their testimony, and also Mr. Reynoso for bringing the perspective of state employees as well. As has been stated, this is something that is long overdue. It's a step towards progress, and I appreciate the opportunity to present today, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Richardson. And with that, members, we'll lay this over, and again, we'll bring it back up at a later date when we get the amendment worked out. Thank you, Mr. Representative Richardson.